Profit organization focused on equipping teachers and leaders with resources, networks to improve outcomes for diverse learners. So our mission today is to explore best practices for teaching students. Brooke, thank you. Thought I'd already done it. I did not share my screen, so apologize, folks. Here we go. So today's mission is to explore best practices for teaching students that are both in person and virtually simultaneously. So let's go ahead and jump in. Our current context, as you know, some students have or will be returning soon to in person. Some students, though, could remain virtual for the rest of the year. So we're going to be balancing both worlds likely. And so special ed and EL teachers are being asked to teach students online and in person at the same time. Now it's likely that, one teacher won't do simultaneous teaching all day, doing some, all virtual or maybe all in person in addition to this. But given just talking to teachers, this is one of the more challenging sort of mediums to try to manage both at the same time. Wanted to talk and get ideas from teachers who are already doing this. So just quick clarification, what is hybrid teaching or simultaneous? And the pictures sort of explain it, but the teachers clearly got students on the board here, the Zoomers are on the board, and then the in-person students as well. So that's what we'll be talking about today. So some challenges. It can be challenging managing, just an in-person class, and sometimes there's managing just to manage an online one, but now we're having to manage both. And so there's even more to juggle. And something that keeps sort of reoccurring theme is inequities can increase between the in-person students and those that remain virtual. Because we know it's harder for most students to stay engaged virtually for long periods of time. It's harder to connect with virtual students versus in person. And so it's just a lot easier to monitor those that are in the building. And this is a quote from a teacher in New York. He says, "You want me to be there for the in-person students and there for the remote students, and I don't feel like I'm getting either one." So having talked to teachers, it is definitely doable. It just takes more planning in some respects, or a different type of planning, different strategies to do both well. So what I've been doing is just talking to teachers and saying, who have already been doing this, like, what tips do you have? What are some just simple strategies that other teachers could replicate? And then I also has been reading about what instructional coaches have been saying about this as well. So based on all that, came up with 3 keys to teaching simultaneously. The first one is stay connected. And this continue to be really intentional, because we know strong relationships unlock that learning. And so be intentional about how you're going to connect those in-person learners with the online learners in a consistent way. So keep things simple and consistent. Have a core set of virtual tools and class materials that all students use. Try to keep it simple. And then the third key is engaging students. That really, to promote engagement, have to really plan in advance to monitor and provide feedback to all. So plan in advance how you'll check for understanding and give that quality feedback to students in both environments. So just have to be a little more intentional, make sure both get it well. So here are the keys for staying connected, some ideas that teachers implemented. One is, if you have the luxury, whether it's in a small group or in class, both were saying using 2 devices. So one was projecting the Zooms or the teen gallery onto the board, and the other was actually managing the content. One thing they said, especially a self-contained teacher, but another teacher said this as well, by projecting the students on the board, all students can see them, and just the size, for just something as simple as the size of students on the screen, help keep the in-person students connected to those virtual. Another teacher did a Zoomers pass it on. And so essentially, she's asking one teacher to start, say they're reading a passage, one virtual student would read it or ask the question and then pass it to another virtual student, like when they were popcorn reading. She did say that it's important to mute the in-person students so that Zoomers, if you will, can hear what each other are reading. So that was just a lot of these are how to engage with virtual students in a way that's different than in person. There's bookends, and I have linked here some ideas, but it's consider icebreakers consistently, at the beginning of class or end of the day, to promote that connection between the students. So just quick fun activities that you could do. So some teachers said that's really been great. And one example is like a show and tell, for example. We'll get into that in a little bit. This actually speaks to that. Increase virtual social events. So Friday class lunch, midday 10-minute dance contest. Again, it's just structured events or unstructured events, but scheduled events, I should say, for students to connect. And then set a goal of texting. So I love this from one teacher. She said, yeah, just one text a day, but either to a parent or the online student with a positive message, keeping it positive and prioritizing those students with poor attendance. So that was the first key, stay connected. Now we'll move on to keep it simple and consistent. So the teachers said this is crucial. Of course, have same learning devices in both locations, and I think most schools are doing that. Of course, have a core set of virtual tools that all students are using. So even those that are in person are still using the tools that the virtual students are using. And one reason that's important is so all students can add responses to the chat or Google Doc or respond in the platform, but all students can see all the responses. So help them. Yeah, it's just, I think that consistency again between home and the school. The other one here is student materials at home should mirror those being used in person. So if students are using whiteboards, in person, then they're doing that at home. Or if you've got math manipulatives for in person, you've sent those fraction strips home in advance, for example. The other I've seen, this is again a self-contained teacher do, where the hands-on activities at home mirrored the slide deck. And I'll give you an example. So what she was doing, this is an elementary class, they're doing morning meeting. The first two images at the top there are actual power, which is shown in her slide deck. But she had sent home a binder and there's a section for morning meeting. And so the students during morning meeting at home mirroring what was on the slide deck were, as they talked about, what is the season they're adding that season, for example, and what the temperature is. So just again, that keeping it simple and consistent. And lastly, if you're not familiar with classroomscreen.com, I think it's great because it's one screen, but it's got a lot of tools in it. This I kind of just put up there. What the one teacher talked about is she would just put up the timer on the board, and then it said it was really helpful for all of her students. She would actually pull the text tool and script out her directions, which is just a great teaching tool because instead of just being a verbal direction, now they're also written. And so students could refer back to it, but having those tools in the same place made things easier for her. So the third key is around engagement, but it's planning for monitoring and feedback. I think this is so crucial. And I love this quote from Doug Lemov, Teach Like a Champion. It says, the amount of practice we give our scholars does not matter. Practice is not meaningful. And so for practice to be meaningful, scholars need consistent targeted feedback. And that's really so we don't, this comic, it says, I said I taught him, I didn't say he learned it. And so we can avoid that. Here are some, I guess, tips on how to do that well. So just a quick reminder. First, this is just an image, again, how much easier it is to respond to students in class. Like if they're doing a math, we could tell like, what are the misconceptions, what steps broke down, whereas it maybe if they're virtual, we're just concerned about, is their answer correct? So it's a question for you that I would, if I'm you, I'm trying to answer in advance of my lessons consistently. How am I going to monitor those virtual students and in person, and making sure I have real clarity on what my strategies for that is? The same for providing feedback. Now, it will help if the tools you're using are consistent, between the two. It'll certainly will help, but there's still be some nuance between the two. And the third thing here is, will you set aside time in your schedule to give students feedback on completed work? I thought this was really unique. I've not seen this. The idea that if it's explicit in your schedule, it's more likely to happen. And common theme is like, it's so hard to engage students, and the pace of learning when they're virtual can be real challenging, but we know that the more feedback, the quality feedback you give, the more engaged they are and the more they learn. So just keep that all in mind here. Some more tips. So one teacher had a virtual student monitor. And what that is like she might get preoccupied at times in lessons. So she had one student just flag her down if there was a student had added something to chat or had their hand raised and she didn't notice. So it's just another set of eyes. So a virtual student monitor. All students, though, were asked to show their work. So again, I mentioned this earlier, so all students can see their responses. For example, they all added to the chat. They all respond in the platform. And if the teacher is going to give student feedback in person, like on their work, just use a document camera, or this is another tech platform called EdLight, where it's focused on actually student work and being able to show student work to all the students. So here's some more. There's another one. If you could see this, but this is the teacher's projected her board or projected her screen onto the board, and she's pulled up her chat into the bottom right-hand corner. So as she's teaching students, it's just easier for her the visual when students are chatting questions or responding. It's right there in front of her. So I thought that was a good tip. And this one is equal participation, because a reoccurring theme is it's so much easier to call on students that are in person. And so to prevent that, make sure they're more equitable, and it's just a good cold call. It's a good strategy in general to engage and check for understanding. Is, the old school chat sticks. You could write their names on the chat stick and pull it out. There's different students' names, or classroom screen has a random name generator. So you click on that and it generates the student's name. But just a great way to make sure you're equitable in who you're calling on, because it'll just be so much easier to call on the students that are in person. So here's additional consideration for diverse learners. Clearly, some students are going to need some more tailored supports. Here are 8 that we thought through. The live captioning is kind of new. There's this company is connected with Zoom. I'm not sure if they do it with Teams, but essentially you can imagine subtitles on a movie. Same things happen into the Zoom meeting. So it's another, just instead of just being a lot of verbal stuff, it's also that visual piece. We're getting close to the end here. Embedded in this slide deck, I'm not going to go through it because it's a lot of text and it would just take time, but I did talk to a K2 self-contained teacher. I think it's a little bit different context than, say, if you're inclusion resource or an EL teacher. But most of her students were nonverbal. And so I asked her these questions, and I've got her responses in here. So if you're a self-contained teacher, or a colleague it'd be great reference when you get the slide deck. But asked her, how does she organize her schedule? How does she manage in-person students during whole group? How do you manage instructional materials for both in-person and virtual learners? And then just ask any additional considerations for planning. So I thought it was really just a good and unique perspective. So in summary here, got a checklist for simultaneous teaching questions. How will I help my online students feel like a part of a class? We talked about staying connected. What tools or apps am I going to use? It can be used easily in both environments. So it can be simple and consistent. And last but not least, how I both monitor and give timely feedback to students in both environments. So I'm planning in advance, how am I going to give that to students who are in person and those at home? So a few additional resources. If you don't have a .cam, but you can use an iPhone, there's just directions on how to do that. Some more ideas on, I talked earlier about bookends and just other activities for students to stay connected to each other. And so those are some good ideas. And then 2 articles. This bottom one's a video. It is of a general education class, but I thought sort of it's like the video, but also the interview with the teacher on how she kind of thought through how to do that hybrid teaching. But that was good perspective as well. So thank you for coming. Next week is maximizing small group intervention time, and love to have you. We're going to stay on. So I'd love, if you have tips, you're already doing simultaneous teaching, have any tips, we'd love to hear that. Of course, love to hear your questions as well. So.